Oof. Okay, this is emotional, and it's also inspiring. So this part of, I really feel, it's hard to encapsulate it all between life and death, since they are really married to each other. I do need to be very transparent about this, which is often a painful thing to say. So just rewind a little bit. We'll rewind again, rewind the tape. So when I got, this is a wild story. When I got my cancer diagnosis, my stepmom, like almost like to a T, when my diagnosis came, my stepmom was celebrating 22 years of having her cancer in remission. She had gotten cancer and full-blown non-Hodgkin's, one of the two, a very aggressive one version. And I remember she had said that she prayed to God that she would just live long enough to watch my little sister, who was 5 at the time, just grow up and make it out of high school. If she could just be alive to watch her daughter, her own daughter, just make it to 18, that she was going to be happy. And that was an important thing. So when I got my diagnosis, my stepmom was celebrating her cancer, 22 years in remission, and the first thing she said to me, and again, this is all she knew, and so it's not a blame, or it's just a factual statement, trying to leave the emotion to the side. She said, you have to go get chemo, you have to do radiation, and to do exactly as the doctors say, they're going to save your life. Because that's what happened to her. She felt that the doctor saved her life and chemo radiation saved her life, and she was going strong, 22 years. It fully surpassed the 18 years that my little sister was, as my little sister was now 31 or 32. So almost double. And I did none of what my stepmother said. And so eventually, within a year or two, she stopped talking to me, and my siblings stopped talking to me, and perhaps it was fear that froze them. Even my father didn't really know how to talk to me. So it was very, 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 very hard to have zero family support. They don't have a financial constitution to have helped me financially, but emotionally they did, and they just X'd themselves out of the equation because I didn't do exactly what they said. And it was so foreign to them that I would march to the beat of my own drum and think that nature was going to heal me, or prayer was going to heal me, or God was going to heal me. And the irony, because she was so Catholic, so my faith was so big and hers was so small. And within a year of, the numbers are blurred a little bit, but kind of from the time that they stopped talking to me, which was about 2.5, 3 years into my diagnosis, her cancer came back. And she died 1.5 years ago. And that was so hard because her cancer came back, and she did exactly as she did the first round, and she went straight for the whole hospital and everything, and she lived horizontally for a year, in and out of treatment, 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 everything, chemo, radiation, experimental, even the advanced, what is that one? Stem cell. And her state government job offered her gold standard insurance, so thank God, this was like hundreds and thousands of dollars worth of insurance coverage for her cancer care. And when she died, it was so traumatic, and it was so jarring, it was so bizarre. It just wasn't supposed to happen. She just turned 60. She was so young. And I went with all these weird mixed feelings of, I'm alive. I never subscribed to any of this. And she's gone, and she's dead. Her body's dead, not her spirit, but her body's dead. And my whole family froze. And really important, 2 months before that, my friend Lara died. And that's a whole other story. I can't go into that right now. It's too much. But Lara died. My stepmom died 2 months of each other. And they were both traumatic deaths. And in their traumatic deaths, I was, sort of over the body of my stepmom. And I'm thinking, it didn't have to be this way. As she was dying, my father, in his fear and his rage and his anger, he was hiding in the downstairs part of their house. Their house was like a little 2-level house. And when I got there and I watched her die in 11 days, I flew in from California. I didn't realize it was going to happen so fast. She'd given up on treatment because her body was so ravaged from all of the chemo and all of the radiation. She just was down to something like 70 pounds. She was like a little street cat, alley cat found in a corner. And my father was downstairs and he wouldn't come up. He just couldn't go up there. And I just saw these two broken people, couldn't even say I love you to each other as she was dying. And in those 11 days that I was there, I was just looking at all the dynamic of my family, having experienced one of my dearest friends, Lara, having died 2 months before, and in her death, seeing the trauma that was left behind for her child and friends and lover and ex-husband. And I was thinking, this whole death thing can't be like this. It can't be so traumatizing. It can't be so painful, right? Because it's got to be something that has to be healing, or there's got to be some sort of peace at the end. And I'm just giving you the truncated version because I dove right in. My stepmom gave me the biggest gift she could have ever given me, because the gifts for the dying really are, I say this over and over again like a broken record, the gifts of the dying are really for us here in the land of the living. They give us so much if we're paying attention. There are all these little keyholes that are popping up, and if you're just paying attention to that tiny little nuance, you're going to get their gifts. And there's so much to say. It's so hard. I have all these feelings, but I was in the room, and I can't remember, but my stepmom's best friend, Kathleen, who's now become such a beautiful, pivotal part of my life, she mentioned, she was the first person to talk about death doulas, and she said something like, there's a thing called a death doula, and they help in the process of dying, and they help the patient. And they also help the families of the loved ones. And I can't remember how it all went, but I just dove into the land of Google, and I did death doula, and a whole sphere of everything popped up. And basically following the model of a baby doula, of the birth doula, who helps to usher life in and supporting the mom or the husband or the family. So a death doula basically is helping the life that's being ushered out, or helping to usher the life out. So not just support for the dying, but support for their community or the family or the loved ones. Or let's say someone doesn't have anyone. A death doula can come in and hold that space and, help to create that container. And just bringing that light and that love and creativity into the room is so important, because so many people are alone, and they're alone in their grief, and they're alone in their aging, and they're alone in their illness, and they're afraid to ask for help. So there's a thing called the silver tsunami of our older generation boomers, or I don't know where the cutoff for boomer is. I know there's an okay boomer for the young boomer, and then there's a middle-aged boomer and an old decrepit boomer. But there's this thing called the silver tsunami, and there's 25% of boomers that never married and never had children. So who's going to take care of them? And if 1 billion of us are going to die in the next decade, who's going to take care of these hundreds of thousands of elders with no spouse and no child, and perhaps alone without community? So me and our death doula community. So there's a beautiful thing called end-of-life midwifery, and it entails all sorts of different healing agents and modalities, and people talking about the conversation, which is the most important conversation, as I always say, that America is not having, which is, what does your end of life look like? What happens if, God forbid, you have an accident tomorrow? You know, what if you end up horizontal in ICU? Do you have someone that's going to speak for you? Do you have a voice? Do you have a community? Do you have friends? It's not just about dying. It's about anything that could lay you up, you know, or put you into an isolated hospital room, or God forbid, if you don't have insurance or you don't have any sort of savings, what happens when you're alone and you're at home? So it's a lot, but because of my stepmom's death, I looked into what is a death doula, and immediately the universe opened up, and there was a class being taught by this organization called ANELDA. And they were teaching this up in San Francisco, but they teach this course all over America. It's basically end of life, I don't want to say do's and don'ts, but it's end of life care. It's how to sit at the bedside of the dying, but not just that. Like, let's swim upstream. For me, it's not just sitting at the bedside of the dying. It's about education and literacy and conversations that matter, and conversations that are difficult, but if you just put a little dent in the ice, you'll see people have so much to share. And, you know, someone may get to the end of their life never having seen someone dying, never having seen a dead body, and that for them causes their own kind of trauma. I know my own father to this day can't really fully grasp what happened with his wife when she was dying. He couldn't even say I love you to her. She couldn't say I love you to him. They were so broken. And in my stepmom's death, it froze something in my dad even more. So it made him even harder and more bitter. And he's just becoming a smaller and smaller shell of who he is. So that's an example of how death can traumatize someone. He doesn't even have the emotional intelligence to understand what's happened to him, that his grief is trapped and his trauma is trapped. So somewhere along the line with our death doula studies, it is an opportunity to open up these topics that might be very, very difficult. But coming in as a neutral party, you're able to do that for others. Whereas when you have the family dynamic, it might be very complicated or complex. So I'm just touching the surface of what a death doula is and what we do and the activism and the literacy, but it's a movement, and it's happening in California and in Washington and in Oregon, and there's a lot of amazing people that are going into this field because we need them, and they're going to help us as we're getting older or getting sicker, or as our lives are going to end. You know, because that's a real thing we don't talk about. And it's not all like doom and gloom and dorm and storm. It's, you know, life is amazing, but there is a reality there's going to be a chapter of our lives, and it's going to allow us to exit. And how are we going to deal with that if we can't even talk about things like endings or grief or aging? How are we going to deal with like the big, you know, event of our lives, the biggest event of our lives, which is death? And I'm not explaining this very well. I don't feel like I'm doing my death doula education any service. I'm gonna have to circle back, you know, but it's brought me a lot of pleasure to be a death over dinner hostess and to attend death salons and to get trained with ANELDA and to continue to take courses on everything from how to sit vigil, how to set the room up, how to bring in complex family dynamics, how to be that neutral party that can help, how to go into hospice care and re-educate people working in hospice care or palliative care. I know there are progressive hospitals that are actually training or retraining some of the doctors and nurses on how they can have more humane conversations with the families of the dying that are in ICU and are in the hospice wards of their hospitals. I mean, there's a huge movement. It's happening. The sea change is here. And I feel so honored, you know, to have been able to sit at the bedside of my stepmom, and that she allowed me that, because it's a very private moment for someone, and for them to allow you in really is It's a rare gift. And if you're paying attention and you're listening to them, they have a lot to share. So onward and upward, more death doula training and studies coming, and more death doula events and death cafes and death over dinners. So now that I'm in New York, I want to organize this. So to be continued, and more to come on that crazy chapter, which is work that's so needed. It's like being a social activist. You know, it's like marching for other people's rights, even though you may not know them. I feel it's something that's inside of me. It's my own activism. Some people love babies, and some people love animals, and some people love the rainforest. I don't know. I love old people. I love grumpy old people because they need love too. Amen to grumpy old people. Yay.